You think a warship is crewed by soldiers. It's not. It's crewed by fuel. The Glory of Sol has been flying for 700 years, and somewhere in the lower decks, the bodies of every man who ever served are still plugged into the walls. They're not dead. They're part of the ship now. And if you serve long enough, you will be too. I learned the truth about service on my 16th day aboard the Glory of Sol, when I found the first body folded into the conduit housing like a prayer pressed between pages. My name is Corvin Hale, and I was assigned to the Glory of Sol as a junior void rigger 3 months after my 18th birthday, which means I had already survived longer than most boys pulled from the hive recruitment tides. The battleship was a Mars-forged Leviathan, 10 kilometers of iron and faith wrapped around a core so old the tech priests whispered its keel had been laid during the founding of the segmentum solar itself. When I first saw it through the viewport of the personnel lighter, hanging in the black like a cathedral someone had launched into the stars and forgotten to call back, I felt something I mistook for pride. That feeling lasted exactly as long as it took for the lighter to dock, for the pressure doors to hiss open, and for the smell to reach me. It was not the stink of unwashed bodies or recycled air, though both were present. It was the scent of oil older than my bloodline, of incense burned in quantities that suggested desperation rather than reverence, of metal heated and cooled so many times it had developed its own mineral breath. Underneath it all was something else, something I would not have words for until much later. The smell of a place that consumed people the way a forge consumes coal, steadily and without preference. The deck officer who processed my assignment was a woman named Corvash, a void born with skin like parchment stretched over bone. She spoke without looking at me as she branded my left forearm with the crew designation mark. The last brand hissed and I bit down on my tongue hard enough to taste copper. But she continued speaking in that same flat monotone, explaining that I would be assigned to Subdeck 9, Compartment Turte under Gangavel, that my shift rotation was 8 hours labor, 4 hours rest, repeating without cessation except for mandated prayer observances and nutrition allotments, and that failure to report constituted dereliction punishable by flogging, or worse, depending on the commissariat's mood. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were the color of dirty ice. "Welcome aboard the Glory of Sol," she said. "The Emperor protects." I repeated it because it was expected. She handed me a data slate and dismissed me with a gesture that suggested I had already ceased to exist. I learned quickly that officers regarded riggers as components, interchangeable parts in a vast mechanism whose true function we were never meant to understand. We were the hands that reached into spaces too small for servitors, the bodies sent into radiation-flooded compartments with only rebreather masks and the promise of the Emperor's mercy, the eyes that checked welds in the dark places where the ship's machine spirit grew restless. Subdeck 9 was 17 levels below the primary habitats, accessible only through vertical shafts that required climbing in near total darkness because the lumen strips had failed decades ago. The first descent, I counted 412 rungs before my boots hit solid plating. The air was 10 degrees colder down there, moving in strange patterns, gusting from vents that should have been sealed, falling still in corridors that should have had active circulation. I learned to read those currents the way a sailor reads the sea. They revealed cracks, pressure failures, and the moods of machine spirits better than any schematic. Gangavel was a bull of a man, gene bulked and augmented, his left arm whining when it moved, his right eye glowing faint red. He looked at me like a tool he expected to break. His first question? "Can you read Gothic script?" I said yes. He handed me a leather-bound manual so old the pages crumbled at the edges. "This is the rigorous catechism. Memorize the first 12 cantos before your next shift. Learn the litany of acceptable pressure variance and the prayer of seal integrity. This ship is not a machine. It is a living temple, and we are the monks who tend it. Fail to show reverence, and the glory will kill you. Fail to perform your duties, and I will kill you. Do you understand?" I said I did, though I understood nothing. My bunk was a metal shelf 18 inches wide with a mildew-smelling mattress and patched into near uselessness. Above me, someone had scratched hundreds of tally marks in clusters of 5. I did not ask what they were. I already knew. The first week was an education in pain. Volst sent me into crawl spaces barely wider than my shoulders, conduit tunnels hot enough to blister exposed skin, ventilation shafts so thin I had to work in 30-second intervals before retreating to gasp for air. I learned to identify cables by touch alone, to distinguish the healthy hum of a plasma relay from the stuttering whine of imminent failure. The ship made sounds no schematic accounted for. Deep groans like a beast in pain, chimes from empty compartments with no bells, and whispering in the vents that almost sounded like voices. I learned not to listen. The riggers taught me the unwritten rules. Never work alone in the starboard tertiary coolant manifold, because its machine spirit was malevolent and had crushed 3 men by closing blast doors that should have been locked open. Never touch the brass plating in Subdeck 7, because it carried a charge the tech priest insisted was impossible, but which had stopped a man's heart 2 months prior. Never look directly at the servitors in the reclamation bay, because some still had enough human awareness to recognize pity, and pity made them scream. I learned the glory of Saul had served for 7 centuries, fought in campaigns no one bothered to list, destroyed 2 orc cruisers, 1 chaos raider, and something the older riggers called the weeping vessel, whose survivors were sealed away in compartments that would remain locked until the day the ship finally died.